Okay, welcome everyone to the Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Wednesday, October 9th, 2019. This is a production of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, part of the Public Teachings in English. My name's Rick Crammond. I'll be your host today. And I think we're just about ready to begin today's workshop. I think we're actually ready. Okay, so perhaps I will start my video just to begin for today. Let's see here. Okay, that should be up and running. And hi everyone. So usually we begin by asking if anyone has something they'd like to show or present. And sometimes that can be a little slow to get going. So I'll put up my hand. And my hand grabs this toroid structure, which I've shown before, which I think is really cool and is worth looking at. It comes as a flat package, as probably we do when we were in space. And then it unfolds itself into this structure quite magically. And it is a toroidal structure with this kind of egg-shaped structure in the middle, which you can vary quite easily by simply expanding and contracting the outer toroid. And by contracting the outer toroid, it expands the inner egg, which is quite interesting. So if you wanted to compress something in that inner part, you could expand the outer toroid and it actually tightens into the center core there until it reaches its limit, which to me is like the Coulomb barrier of the atom, you could say. And the interesting thing about this as a mechanical structure is it is composed of a flat steel kind of flat and thin piece of steel. It's all one continuous piece, and it's been spot welded together in one place in this continuous length of flat wire, essentially. And if you were to take one piece of this and rotate it, it actually rotates the entire structure when you do that. And you can continue doing that. And if you were to mark a spot on this, you would see it eventually rotates around every position in this structure. So essentially, it's like sort of like a what do you call it? A Mobius strip, you could say, where you go around one side and it goes around the other side, and it just continually, it's in continual rotation or continually finding a new position as this structure rotates this way. And then, of course, you could also have rotation around its axis that way, which is a different kind of rotation. So typically in a plasma, you might have both kinds of rotation. Both the whole structure can be rotating and the toroid itself will be rotating. So it has a exit, you could say, while this rotates out of the top, or could be out of the bottom, but in this case, we're just as an example, out of the top and rotating into the bottom. And as it goes into the bottom, it goes into the center of the structure, which is, if you were to think about it, that would be the center of the black hole or the void in the center, or the soul of the structure. however you like to look at the center of things. And it's pretty special because, as I said, it's very tight there right now. But also, as I've demonstrated before, you can take a normal ping pong ball, in this case a little bit abnormal, it's got an eyeball in it, and you can, first of all, it sits on the structure very nicely, but you can actually push it down so that that ball becomes entrapped in the center of that toroid. Is that kind of the way maybe that's our soul in the middle of our brain, trapped in our brain, in the toroid fields of our brain. But it's also a protective place for this environment where it can still kind of see out, but it's a little harder. We can make it a bigger, more room for it, and eventually collapse the whole structure, and that releases the eyeball to be free of that physicality, let's say. So it's a nice analogy, I think. And I determined that you can actually put several of these eyeballs or round ball structures in the center of this, and then expands to accommodate naturally till it can actually be as same size inside as it is outside, and then it becomes a spherical structure. As you can see, there's no longer, the ball is free to rattle around in the entire inside of the structure, and unless I release some of the pressure, and then that inner core starts to form. You can see it there now. It's about half the size of the sphere, and eventually it can be made quite small and even so tight that I can levitate that ball inside here just by tightening the structure. It goes from the bottom up to the middle there, and even up to the top, and squirting out of the top with a little bit of pressure. So just realizing, I think that my camera might be doing the autofocus funky chicken here, but anyway, I just wanted to get things kind of started with that. Any comments? Anybody want to show something? Oh,
Hi, Rick.
Ah, Johnny, hi.
John, ¿puedes traducir, por favor?
¿Cómo no? Sí.
Hola a todos.
Hello, all of you.
Rick, Jetta ha visto ese video hace un año
Jetta has seen this video a year ago,
y de entonces ha hecho el primer toroid
and she has made the first toroid,
y le hemos hecho con el hilo de cobre.
We have done this with copper wire.
Y Jetta ha logrado hacerlo moverse, pero no mucho como lo muestras tú.
But she hasn't managed to make it move as much as you do it with yours.
Y siempre me ha preguntado qué hace Rick después de moverse así.
And she always asks, how is it that Rick manages to move the way it does with his toroid?
Es una maestra a hacer toroides y de entonces le hace todo el tiempo. Bueno, todo el tiempo en el sentido que está en el oasis. Y lo que estás mostrando ahora.
She has mastered the way how to make these toroids, and she always shows what you're doing right now.
Te ama por lo que has mostrado.
And she loves what you are showing.
Hemos comprado hilo de steel. pero redondo, no como se puede ver.
Sí, Gianni, lo que tenés que conseguir es la cuerda de un reloj grande.
Sí, ya lo sé.
They have made toroids out of steel wire, but I told him that he should get hold of the spring from a big clock.
Y Jetta ha logrado hacer eso.
Jetta has managed to do this, what you're doing,
Y muestra a los niños y los encantan.
and she shows the kids this doing these tricks, and they love it.
Y me encanta como hace Rick ahora.
And Johnny loves what you're doing right now.
Y Jetta está en el oasis, yo en el laboratorio, y escucha y puede ver ahora lo que hace Rick.
And Jetta's in the oasis right now, but she's on the phone and she can listen and see you there.
Y ahora Jetta me ha dicho, ya lo sé cómo lo hace Rick.
And Jetta said, now I know how Rick does all these tricks.
Y gracias Rick.
And thank you, Rick.
Yes, I like this one especially, and it's quite amazing how this
It
little
crawls along.
thing, it'll just go right down your arm. Doesn't matter about obstructions or uneven surfaces. It just accommodates its central core. See, its central core, if you look at it, is wrapped relatively tightly against my skin here. You can actually see it's kind of not cutting in, but it's, you know, tightly wrapped onto my wrist here at spots. And whereas the outer part just floats around it. And so when it moves up and down, it actually like crawls along your skin basically on its inner coil. And it feels really weird. It's like it hugs your skin, and yet it moves so fluidly, like it's so natural, just like a bubble sort of thing. And yet it's all made out of one single piece of wire. And when this thing gets moving, you see when it moves really fast, you see how it looks like a solid object. It doesn't, you no longer see the individual strands when it's moving very, very quickly. It looks like a soap bubble, more or less. So to me, that just indicates, you know, what we see and what the scientists see when they look down at the atom, this thing spinning, then what you see is just a blur of what looks to be a solid object or some sort of Coulomb barrier where, you know, where it's like a solid surface, but perhaps it's just fields which actually have field lines, and it's actually pretty easy to go in between the field lines to get to that center core if you really want to. I mean, something relatively big can fit right in between those field lines as long as they're not spinning. So perhaps as they found out with zero temperature experiments and so on, when the atom stops spinning or close to it, then it has different properties. You can access that core easier and so on and so forth. So it's very interesting. I've got a couple of short videos that I'm not sure if I've shown before, but I will show them that I recorded. I can't remember exactly how it goes here, but I will show it. It may be a world premiere, but don't count on it if I have shown it before. Let's see here. Oops. Stop the video and share here. This is a couple minutes long, so and as I said, can't quite remember. I think this one is the toroid and a ball, and maybe I'll comment a bit as we go through it, depending. So, okay, I think we're ready to go here. Should be able to see that, and should be able to hear if there's any background sound. You got a couple of false starts here. This isn't edited. This is all raw video. This is a relatively heavy ball. It's a heavy rubber kind of ball that you might use for magic tricks and that kind of thing. It's not a it's lightweight plastic ball. It's quite amazing how the toroid contains it so well and is able to actually lift that weight. And in a way, it's a protective cage for the ball as well, depending on how you look at it. Okay, that's that one. And I have one other one. I think I might have more or less demonstrated this already, but let's have a look at it anyway. Okay, this is a couple minutes long as well. Let's have a look at that. This is the spiral toroid and the tube, which I've already more or less shown, I guess, but we'll see. This is a really interesting aspect of the toroid, is how it fits the hand so nicely.
It really exemplifies the word accommodate.
Oh, exactly. Yes, yes. Really good observation, Mark. I'll show an example of that as well. Let me stop the share here and start my video again. And like, okay, so here's the toroid. And what happens is when I put this on my hand or allow it to go into that position, and I let a few coils go beyond my thumb and stick my thumb through, it's strange. It feels very natural when it's in that position, when you have it, your thumb sticking through, and it becomes like your fingers are sticking through, but the whole thing is sort of trapped in that position. And what it does is you can see where these inner strands here come around and grip onto the wrist, and they also grip on to the around where the thumb is. And so you have this, it's almost like if you had sprained your thumb or something, it would be a way of supporting. You just tape around all of this, and it would naturally, when you compress it, it actually contains and supports that whole area. It feels very strange. And when you pull your whole hand in, it does the same thing around your fist. It's totally contains the fist with that inner, that tight inner egg-shaped structure that I was talking about. And it's quite amazing how, you could, if you stick your fingers through the coils, then again, they all grip, and it's like you're saying, Mark, it's accommodating. It just accommodates whatever you want, whatever position you want to use it or engage with it. It adapts, changes its shape, willing to go there. I could probably put two hands in, right? There's two hands contained. And its inner has gone now to the outer structure, and they become like one. So it's like a sphere, like I showed earlier, when you take that, you see the inner thing there now, and you can expand the inner and compress the outer, and the inner and the outer become one. They become like one skin. One is going in one direction, like one way, and the other is going in the other direction. So you have this two-way kind of structure that would be very strong, very it's a double layered skin kind of thing with a in between as well. So it's actually got three layers to it. And so when you do something like accommodate your fist in there and then two of them, it makes that same sphere, but in this case, it leaves the entire bottom open for a sort of an exit or an entrance, depending on how you look at that. It's able to accommodate and seal off this whole area where the wrist is with a more or less perfect sort of adaptable, in the same way our iris in our eye or the iris in a camera opens up in much the same way. If you look at that structure there and how it accommodates any diameter right down to nothing. and it'll go around. It doesn't matter if it's a rectangular, odd-shaped structure, is still tight in against it wherever it contacts. And as you can see with that larger tube, the larger tube also got it over there, sitting over there on the table, actually, this thing here. And this easily accommodates the tube or any size up to its maximum of its fold down shape size, which is that inner diameter.
It's
And
like
then-
it becomes a part of you when you had it on your hand. I've done that before, and it almost feels so natural, like it belongs there.
Yeah, it feels alive.
Are you using the matter state to help us to reach the level of understanding of the soul of the man? Let's say your arm is an intention and this spring device is a GANs. Could we work on that? Could we work off of that in a way?
Okay, I could sort of go with that if you can. So you say my arm is my intention, or in a way a direction, you could say, like pointing in a direction. So and you're saying that this is like the GANs, or actually my arm is already composed of GANs in a way you could think of, and nano. And but you could look at the way I look at it is this behaves like the fields around us, the plasma of our fields. This, we know that plasma tends to work in a toroidal way when it starts to get wound up and rotating, with itself. You can look at the plasma animation video that shows the ray turning into the plasma. That looks very similar to this in the way it interacts. And
For sure, with the rotational and the directional together, that's what the plasma has, where a field just has a directional motion. So this has a rotational plus a directional, representing a plasma.
Yeah, and you can imagine if this was the fields of our body, and it's essentially around the whole of the biological machine, but we can also direct those fields in the same way that in a way I could direct this toroid off the end of my finger. And you can imagine when you're directing someone to, yeah, so which way is it to Timbuktu? Well, you go right down that road, down that way, and take a left at the end of that road and a right at the end of that road, and that should get you there. We use our hands to show direction. We also use it if you're making a point. I'd like to point out that this must be done, or that must be done, that kind of thing. Or if you're really making a point with someone else and you want to get literally in their face, you might, I'm telling you to get off my property. And, if you were to actually push them on the chest with that one finger, that would be grounds for
Fisticuffs.
a fisty debate. I was going to, not feisty, but a fisty debate, you might say, yes. So that finger, that in direction, that intention that we point out with our pointer finger is pretty powerful in many ways. And I believe that it's like an extension of our fields, and we allow that, we can actually throw it in a way, throw that field, and someone else can feel it. You point out to some kid that, hey, you're being too loud, and it's like, whoa, it's like, boom, it comes off, bounces off their soul, and they pay attention. it's a force to reckon with, especially in the hands, literally, of a mother and a child, let's say, a misbehaving child. So it's
And
interesting.
then when
Go
you
ahead.
had the ping pong ball inside of the torus there, now we all see that this should represent, saying this, but this represents the soul. And uh, what dawned on me the other day when Mr. Keshe said it's not attached to anything. It just sort of, now here it's attached. You can see it's
Not really, because see, it's only seems to be attached when everything's tight. If I was to loosen up that central core, the ball actually bounces around quite well. And of course, if you loosen it up too much, then it opens up and the ball can actually exit. But yeah, it's encaged, you might say.
yeah.
Yet it does have a degree of freedom within that cage, depending on how much we allow it to open up, you could say. Right?
But what I've been thinking is that the soul is in there like this with our soul, let's say, and it's just sitting there and it's floating there. Mr. Keshe said it's not attached to anything. So all that information and all that communication that's going on with the physicality in the soul is coming through at in a field state. It's not really attached to the physicality. It's floating in there. So there's no brain attached to it. There's nothing, but yet it's like in communication and direction and a scout.
Yeah, and it's contained with these other fields in a way, in that it's they're barriers or structures that are in between the outside, whatever is outside, the external, the world, you could say, and the perception of it through this soul being or whatever in the middle. It doesn't have a direct connection unless we dissolve some of these barriers or some of that distance between that core and the outer. And that's where the emotions come in. That's where the various levels of emotional barriers that in a way protect that soul in the middle, but also encage it. Because a cage is both, even for someone that's in prison or jail, in a way, that cage is restricting their freedom, but at the same time, it protects them from others that might harm them, which in the case of prison, if everyone is in one big room, there'd probably be a lot more harm going on than in individual cells and so on. Or if they're out in public, then they might be harming others, let's say. So, or, affecting others in too much of a extreme way. So in a way that cage is both protective, and like any cage, it also is restrictive of certain freedoms. So interesting.
Yeah, just the idea that it created this whole structure, but yet it's not attached to this whole structure, but yet it's getting all the information and directing and interacting with this structure. It's just on the plasma level.
Mm-hmm.
It created something, but it's not attached to it. Like
attached, but maybe sometimes it gets identified with it. It thinks it is that structure, and it might, it's like when we create something, say we create some GANs or create some new device or create a new dish to eat or something. Just because we created it and it is part of us doesn't mean it's us and that we have to put our full identification on that. Otherwise, we'd be in trouble. We would create a great new meal, but we wouldn't want to eat it because it would disappear, and that would be us disappearing. So I don't want to eat yet because it's actually me that I'm eating, and I think I might disappear once I'm down my throat. So, in a way, it's
a beautiful pedagogical with the soul and the physicality.
It is, I think. And especially when you get this thing spinning, boy, does it ever look like one solid object, and that it would be impossible to penetrate and impossible to get out of and everything else. Right? And it's like, that's the skin of our physicality. The skin is just such a thin layer. All of this, what we call skin on our body, is just, so thin, and yet it's essentially the way we evaluate just about everyone that we encounter. You look at their facial expressions, you look at their body and their demeanor and their skin and the way it moves and all of that, and it's all just a reflection of light on an outer skin of this bag of plasmatic GANs. And yet we attach so much importance to it. The same as when this is spinning and you're looking at it, you would swear that it's a solid structure of this shape, this, a large shape, and it's solid because it will look like a bubble and solid, and it look like a solid skin. But when you get right close to it or slow it down, there's like some big gaps in there where these force fields, where the lines of force are exerted, but in between is the gaps, and the gap structure is as important as the lines of force themselves, because the gap structure means the difference between allowing this this center core to exit or enter, or this other soul, you might say. It can easily move through this outer skin. You can see it just moves right through, in spite of it looking so solid when it's rotating. And it might have trouble with the inner, but as soon as you contract the outer, and then it just fits right through, plops right in, and it's quite at home in that center position. And as I've said before, you can actually alter its position from the lower position to a central position, and even raise it to the upper position of that central thing there. So, but just by putting a bit of pressure on this, the outer coils, you can have full range up and down of that inner soul, you could say. Or alternately, if the inner soul was to raise itself, and it alters the outer as well, it changes the dimensions of the inner, and that automatically changes the dimensions of the outer. So something to keep in mind for those that are doing work on their inner and outer. And we can see how two souls can occupy the same locality as well.
Yeah, but Rick, you're getting into the beautiful people now.
No, I'm getting into those who are true lovers, who become like one soul, and it no longer becomes my wife and myself, it becomes us and we. And you forget that there's even an I, and everything becomes we, and you become what's called a couple. See, coupled, two together. And that way, because the fields are intertwining, and because we are actually all one in essence, when two essences come together with the fields together like that, then they become like one entity, and they behave like one entity, even in spite of differences and arguments and whatnot. They're still deep down tied together and will be forever. Doesn't change. Even if one of these were to finally get out and go away and it's off to another part of the universe, it's still, because they had that connection, it's still connected. This is still connected to that other entity, as they've discovered with even electrons can be attached to other electrons. They always come in pairs. And when one of those two pairs is separated, it still influences the other one, no matter how far apart they are. They're always connected. And that's part of the quantum idea, and being able to do quantum jumping and things like that, which is actually pretty tightly tied into the idea that we had of the two together as well. Because you can imagine two souls in close proximity like that, there's instant communications and a sharing, a common sharing of each other's space. And also it could be an example, like you're saying, Mark, of the beautiful people having what we call what they call in so-called science schizophrenia. But we all have that in some way anyway, because that's part of being on this crazy spaceship called Earth, is we get to have these two parts of ourselves, the physicality and the soul, and they don't always mesh the way that, because they're two different dimensional structures. But you can imagine with someone with two or more what we call personalities, or perhaps souls in the one physical body, that it would get somewhat confusing depending on which one the identity gets identified with. And you could see there could be some conflict between the two, in that I want to be the top dog and I want to be the giver. No, I want to be the top one and I'm going to be the giver. No, I'm going to be, and there's sort of up and down can lead to internal conflict, I would think, with that polarity change that can go on.
And it does.
Yeah. So that's a few thoughts that I had on that. Any comments on, we have a hand up here. Lawrence, here, let me allow you to speak there, Lawrence. In fact, I'll promote you to panelists, just give it a minute to come through.
Hi, good morning. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, Jalal. I thought about, Mr. Keshe said that we should note the name of the company that's been acquired, or that acquired the Keshe Foundation, Mark Ray, he said. And I think it's, again, a play on words, because we have the argon and the potassium in the name, and also what is called a ray, which is basically light. So I thought we should go back to potassium 40 and think and revisit what we've seen about its radiation effect. And if you go on Wikipedia and look at potassium 40, and you take a look at the decay modes, there's a decay mode which involves emission of a gamma ray. And that gamma ray is actually stronger in terms of its electric electron volt charge than what you would get in form of decay of an uranium isotope.
Okay, before you go on, let's have a look at that. Get it up on the sharing here and try to, so we can follow as we go along here.
Rick, did he say argon and potassium? I know potassium is K.
Yes.
And argon is AR, which is Mark Ray, MAR, right?
The M is, I think, magnetic. The AR is argon, and the K is potassium, and the ray is the gamma ray that's emitted by the decay of potassium to argon.
Wow, that's pretty big. I don't think they intended that in the original name of the company, but I really like the way you're interpreting it, and I'll go with that.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's nice. Very nice.
Type in potassium 40, or take a look at potassium 40. Or you can also
before you do that, let me look what I. Whoops! I just dropped something. But I wanted to show you what I just dug up tonight for the first time in many months. Let me just briefly show the video here. Well, I guess I still am, but.
Well, Mr. Keshe used a sort of a play on words when he asked, can we mark a ray? And I think the answer is yes, you can mark a ray.
If you look at these little aluminum balls I was playing with earlier before the show that I've demonstrated in my electrostatic demonstrations, I had 3 of these pulled out and I had them underneath that plastic tube that's in the background over there. There. Right there. And I notice in the potassium, if we go back to that again.
Oh, that was tricky with the thumb, Rick.
In the Wikipedia, what do they have? Potassium that looks just like these little silver balls that I had picked out. So very auspicious there. I love to see connections like that. And anyway, let's carry on with the, I'll stop my videos, carry on with this Wikipedia here. So you were saying about the isotopes.
Specifically potassium 40, or you can also look up potassium argon dating. There's a, I don't know if we can show .edu websites.
Which kind?
It's a top level domain .edu. It's not.
I'd have to look at their terms of use and whatnot.
Okay, then let's not go there.
Right. Wiki we can rely on pretty much. So here's the Wiki 40. It does mention in about 10% of events it decays to argon 40 by electron capture. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Emission of a neutrino and a 1.46 megavolt gamma ray.
Exactly. There's the little gamma ray. I think that's the gamma ray that Mr. Keshe is talking about in the Mark Ray Corporation. This is why RR and K is in the name.
Mm-hmm.
And that gamma ray is actually quite strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you look at it's actually at the level of cosmic rays. You can also take a look at the so-called electromagnetic spectrum on Wikipedia. Exactly. If you can zoom or something, and you see we've been talking about ultraviolet last time, and on the other side, very much to the right, you can see there's those gamma rays. And actually, this little potassium that we've been working with is a very strong gamma ray emitter.
Well, you can see at the right end of the scale at the 10 to the 6, which would be 1,000,000 electron volts, is in the higher range of the gamma rays. And evidently it will go higher, of course, but it's way higher energies than, say, radio waves, microwaves. Everybody's worried about microwaves. That's 10 of the, we're talking about not just 10 times more, we're talking about 10 times 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 more energy than microwaves in gamma rays. Because it's 10 to the minus 4 compared to the 10 to the 6. And that's the difference between there's 10 to the 10th degree, which is pretty major. And we look at infrared, we think infrared's so powerful in the sense that that's what your burner on your electric stove, when it heats up red hot to boil your water, that's the infrared coming off to heat your stove. Well, that's 10 to the 1 or minus 1 kind of range. And here's the gamma rays 1,000,000 times stronger. So yeah, now the thing is, they might be on a micro or nano scale, and not many of them happening on some of these processes. But I think we're on the right track there. We can definitely see where the range of energy lies. It's beyond X-ray machines. Everybody's worried about X-rays, and you should be. But gamma rays are. And radioactive elements are in there too, but gamma rays are beyond that even, or at least beyond some of the radioactive. Okay.
And as a next thinking step, just to compare the power regarding how strong this gamma ray emission is compared to its mass, we have potassium with this 40 or something, and then we have uranium, which is 238 or something like this. And compared to the mass of that element and the power of this gamma ray emission, potassium is much stronger in ratio than uranium. So we have a very strong element in terms of what kind of light it can emit, because gamma rays are basically also light, just like ultraviolet light, just a little bit stronger. And then I found the reason why I bumped in, because you were talking about these pairs of electrons. And if you write in pair production into Wikipedia.
I do see the potassium argon dating is also mentioned here.
Yes, they can tell by the ratio of captured argon gas in different materials compared to the amount of potassium it has, how long this material has been in existence, because you can tell how the gases escape, but if they're captured, then you can tell by the ratio difference, because you know how long it takes for potassium to decay by the mass analysis of the potassium and the argon in those materials, how old that material is. And there's a very nice chart on an edu website where they actually show that it's two forms of gamma radiation that are involved in the decay of potassium to argon. It's not only one, but two. It's McDougall and that's a physicist called McDougall and Harrison who've been looking at this. So there's one form of decay which
it does mention that here. It says it's a rare, potassium-40 is a rare example of an isotope that undergoes both types of beta decay. It's 90% of events, it decays to calcium-40. and with the emission of a beta particle, and which is an electron, with a maximum energy of 1.31 megavolts, and an anti-neutrino. Then in about, well, 11% of events, it decays to the argon-40 by electron capture and the emission of a neutrino, and then the 1.46 megavolt gamma ray. So, and this explains the large abundance of argon in the Earth's atmosphere.
Well, there's also a very minuscule charge at the bottom of this article. Go back into the paragraph, where you've been reading. And at very rarely, at 0.1% of events, it will decay to argon by emitting a positron and a neutrino. And even this decay type involves gamma radiation, about 1.02 mega electron volts. So there's two types of gamma bursts that this potassium-40 can emit. One is an electron capture and then a gamma burst. The other is a positron decay and then a gamma burst.
Yeah, and if we combine that with this paragraph here, potassium-40 is the largest source of natural radioactivity in animals, including humans. A 70 kilogram human body contains about 140 grams of potassium, hence about 0.000117 times 140 equals 0.0164 grams of potassium-40, whose decay produces about 4,300 disintegrations per second, becquerel, continuously throughout the life of the body. So we have these reactions that you're talking about, and some of them will be those extreme ones. Some of them will be part of the 10%. Some will be part of that 0.001% that we just talked about. Of those disintegrations are all happening within our body. So very interesting. Okay, carry on. What were you saying there before I interjected?
The pair production. Go to the top, Wikipedia search, and type in pair production. Second item, I think. Yeah, this is a kind of photovoltaic effect. It's like the photoelectric effect, photoelectric effect. If you go a little bit further down, just after the table of contents, you see a nice image where you can see that the gamma rays is coming in, and that gamma ray is changed into an electron and a positron, a pair of oppositely charged particles. So basically, light is converted into matter. You understand what I mean?
The positron is the proton?
No. The positron is the opposite of the electron. It's the electron with a positive charge. That's the positron.
Right. It's like the what do they call it? We also have the proton and the anti-proton, or.
Well, the thing I wanted to say is that I think it's not the electron itself that's being created, because if we're in the Ganser state with this whole setup that we are usually doing, then usually we're not creating electrons, because electrons are a kid of a neutron. So we most probably are creating a neutron for a start, and then only we have the electron that can be measured. You know, you can take a look at the different articles about neutron detection on Wikipedia again. And it's just like with the neutrino, that it's not directly the neutron that can be observed because it's charge neutral, but there are different effects that the neutron has when interacting with different materials and environments, etc. And that effect is that we observe when we're looking at a neutron, or that we say that we detect a neutron. It's like with this neutrino detector where Mr. Keshe has been laughing at us that we've been bringing it up because they haven't seen anything with burning lots of money because no, it's always the effect that they've been measuring. So I think there's another hole I want to dig with you. Please type in black body radiation into Wikipedia.
Okay.
This is a topic, this black body radiation, that's been bugging physicists because before quantum theory in the beginning of the 1900s. If you just read through this little particle or article and you have in your mind that we've been using nano-coated materials, black materials, there are things that should ring a bell, especially when you come to the point where they write about the ultraviolet catastrophe. There was a theory earlier which postulated that these black materials, if you put them into a cavity, so basically you coat your reactor from the inside with nano-coated material that work as this black body, then if you put radiation on it, the power of that radiation with self-refraction should go to infinite. And because they were thinking in terms of explosive structures that would have broken all the rules of material science and would have gone to the end of the world. But in 1900, in the same year when this black body theory was solved, a French chemist discovered radium. So gamma rays were not in the heads of people. They didn't know about, they knew about ultraviolet light, but they didn't know about gamma rays and cosmic rays and stuff like this. So now we have a black body that's called nano-coating. Then we have an even stronger light than what is ultraviolet light because of the potassium decay that we know of. And combining the two and getting out of this mindset that Planck and Einstein and Bohr brought us with their quantum theories, because they were all theoretical physicists. They were not doing practical reactor design like Mr. Keshe did, and Mr. Keshe had to, work with practical things. And I think just like with the nuclear reactors, where we have a controlled decay of matter and a constant reaction, I think he invented a method with the light emitted by the potassium to constantly create neutrons, the state of neutron and the plasmatic state. And through the interaction with that neutron, with its environment and the constant feedback loop, we have a controlled implosive energy state or energy creation device that works just like this ultraviolet catastrophe in the black body radiation physics history. I know it's extremely story-like that I'm telling, but that's what I found this week and I wanted to share with you.
Very deep, but beautiful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I followed all of that, but
okay, let's go through it slowly.
Yeah, do you want to make some diagrams or do you want to just talk?
I think Wikipedia and talk is nice.
Okay. All right, so go back to where you were when we got to this black body radiation. Maybe we should talk about that a little bit here. Like it mentions that black body radiation is the thermal electromagnetic radiation within or surrounding a body in thermodynamic equilibrium with its environment. emitted by a black body, which is an idealized, opaque, non-reflective body. So even though it does not reflect light, it is emitting this field, basically.
Yeah. So you remember Gerald Pollack with his easy water, where the water
yes.
where it absorbs infrared light, heat, and it creates this exclusion zone, which is basically like the water building a nano coating on the surface, which it is connected with. And then
Hence the EZ, which was exclusion zone, yes.
yes. And with the black stuff, with the nano coating, we have an infrared source, infrared light source. Thermal electromagnetic radiation, if you remember this electromagnetic spectrum that we looked at the beginning, is to the left side of that graph. It's the low wavelength stuff, but it's still light. That's the light we've been using with the light bulbs for quite a long time. You know, that's why even we consider even the sun a black body emitting infrared light and also a bit of UV, but it's this black body radiation that's it's a uniform spectrum radiation. It's like the yin energy from the yin and yang. And then on the other side, you have this ultraviolet or gamma ray, very powerful light coming from the potassium. And the two merge with each other, yin and yang. And when they balance, they create different things. I think they create the neutron. If you take a look at the isotopes of argon, potassium, and calcium, because these are the three involved in this potassium decay, you see it's again a dance around the deuterium and the neutron in the isotopic strength or isotopic compositions of these elements, or how much proton and neutron they contain. And with the nano coating, we have infrared at the outside because the reactor is the black body outside. And in the inside, where we have the gases, we have the scintillation from the reactor. And we have a continuous power source, the potassium 40, that fuels the scintillation and ionization process. And since the nano coating is not only a black body, but also a capacitor and also a superconductor, we have these special effects that we've not been working with up until now in science. And if you take a look at isotopes of potassium, potassium has 19 protons and 21 neutrons. Then if you look at calcium, calcium 40 has 20 protons and 20 neutrons, just one off. Then if you take a look at argon, argon 40 is 1822, 18 protons and 22 neutrons. So it's always just one or two protons difference, just like the Kochen, you know, the base of the star formation. There's always a difference of one or two protons and neutrons. There it is in the middle, potassium 40. And the second and third column, 1921. And if you take a look at the isotopes of the other elements, you will see there's just a slight difference in terms of the count of protons and neutrons. It's simpler if you just type in the URL the name. There's argon 40. Oh yeah, you can go with, yeah, isotopes. And you see there's this radioactive argon 39 is made by cosmic ray activity, primarily from argon 40. I think when we go, when we have the argon 40 created from the potassium, and we have these gamma rays, those gamma rays will then interact with the argon and create this argon 39, which will then create another radioactive source. So we're creating more and more radiation sources. Not only the potassium will be radioactive, but also the argon will turn radioactive. We also will be ionizing the mixture in the reactor by means of this scintillation that the gamma rays produce. You remember the Townsend discharge from the Geiger-Müller counter, where one ray comes in and then cascades down and creates a burst of electrons, a tree of electron bursts in the detector. You remember that?
Yeah.
So I think it's all these effects with the pair production, the photoelectric effect, with the capacitor setup in between the central probe and the outer shell of the reactor, then the capacitance of the walls of the nano-coated materials that we have inside, and this huge energy production that we're creating with these materials that ignites a self-feeding loop. And I think the self-feeding loop involves so much energy that first it's an internal cycle. And then after a while, once the energies can't hold, it's again this high power radiation, that plasma radiation that goes through the wall and then starts illuminating the reactor from the outside. So that whitish bluish glow that Mr. Keshe has been talking about the spaceship is, I think, the result of this inner feedback loop that after a while can't hold on to itself and creates the atmosphere of the spaceship. And this is why he was always saying that we've been taught about all these things, because he's been explaining it multiple times. We just didn't know about this black body radiation and this ultraviolet catastrophe thing that the physicists were thinking about in the beginning of the 1900s. We didn't really appreciate the potassium in terms of a gamma ray source and how strong that gamma ray is compared to different other things. And so we didn't put A and B and C together. It's again the same thing as with the deuterium arc lamp that I've been talking about last time. But compared to the UV light that's emitted by the deuterium, the gamma ray that's emitted from the potassium is much, much stronger. And I think it involves creation of the plasmatic state the GaNs of the neutron and the GaNs of the deuterium and the GaNs of tritium through its interaction, the energy level ganses that we've been working with, or the plasmas of these ganses. And through the plasma of, we have again new sources of light, new, say, radiation sources. Not only that argon-39 will be radiating, but also the neutron and deuterium and tritium plasmas in our devices. And we could also talk about if we create a reactor out of steel, a steel ball, just like we saw with the those balls in Africa or in Brazil that we've been shown. You remember that steel is about 56, but it has isotopes, and we usually say that the copper goes to about 59, 60. 59, 60 in metal state is cobalt. Cobalt is also a radiation source. So I don't know exactly how this pie can be cooked. I'm just thinking in terms of the ingredients. I don't know the exact ratios that we will be using, but you get my point that, that these are most probably those interactions and steps starting from what we've learned, the nanocoating and the GaNs creation, that then create the effect of that plasma generator that we've been shown. And I think in a smaller scale, the GaNs themselves are also a child of these interactions, and like this hold all the potential and principles that this reactor holds. You get what I mean? So basically, that's the explanation of why GaNs work and why they have this field effect, because they're a result of an interaction of these radiations, but on a different scale, not on the nuclear radioactive scale, because they're already in plasma state. So basically, they don't have a frequency anymore. They're connecting with the universal field. So because even when we were working with gamma rays, even though they were very strong, they were still only matter state ingredients because they had a frequency. But if you go to the infinite power, infinitely small frequency, just like Planck did with his quanta, but he was a theoretical physicist, so he had to put numbers in it and formulas in it, and we just say it's the universal field, it's the one creation, which has a magnetic and a gravitational, and the space gap in between. It's the same as what he did, but we didn't want to quantize it. We don't want to put it into small pieces because we consider it one. So the GaNs are an expression of the one. Yeah. Anyone following, or am I just talking bullshit in the air? Recorded on YouTube.
We're trying, but I'm wondering if I'm in the right class. Lauren, are you trying to say that these reactions, are you trying to direct us towards the body? That this stuff is going on in our body?
Of course, of course, of course. Our
remember
body is doing it.
Yeah,
Or we
Mr.
can
Keshe,
create a reactor and also contain those reactions and have them multiply within a reactor environment, right? So.
because I remember Mr. Keshe saying, and it was hard, you know, that the most illegal nuclear thing on this planet is the human beings walking around.
Good one. I don't remember Mr. Keshe saying that. That's a really good one, Mark.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I've heard it mentioned also. Yeah.
He said that we should ban children playing on the playground because when they are going on this seesaw and all the other toys, they are laughing and they are emitting so much radiation, it should be banned.
Yeah, they're little nuclear reactors. We better put suits on them to contain it.
Consider how much they are growing, and the calcium of their bones is coming from this potassium reaction. And like this, there's a lot of decay going on when children or beings are growing up. So I think it's this why it should be banned. Consider an average human of the size of 70 kilograms grown up is emitting 4,400 of these potassium decays in a second. Consider someone who's of smaller size but is growing, and like this is in need of a lot of calcium production, how much of those radiations he or she is emitting.
Mm-hmm. So be careful giving bananas to kids. Bananas are high in potassium, so.
And Laurent, what is the idea you're trying to convey to us on the bigger or smaller level here?
The bigger or smaller level is that I think we're here in this club to discuss how we can reproduce or understand the material level, or coming from the material level, the scaffolding of energies and interactions to create the reactor that we dubbed the plasma power unit, or we dubbed the Magravh unit, or the
well, it's the namesake for this group, the Keshe Plasma Reactor group, right? What was the Keshe Plasma Reactor? And that was originally from the patents and from the original descriptions of Mr. Keshe and the original pictures we saw and so on. That's how it all began. But of course, that description got modified in later years, and it's a bit more inclusive and different now.
Yes, I think I'm still a little bit, old school. I started very early, and I'm still stuck in the early classes.
Yeah,
slow learner.
I still lust for a good reactor that we can see some sort of physicality, some kind of objective result happening that demonstrates without a doubt all of the theories and ideas that we discuss. And I mean, we've seen certain examples, and we know how in a spinning reactor, how the ganses separate out and form rings, and all kinds of things can happen, and people feel various fields and so on. But there's lots of room for demonstrations of what can we do with this, and how far can we take it. I mean, you bring up these ideas, Lawrence, that in our in our GANS creation kits, for example, in that saltwater environment, what Mr. Keshe has called a plasma environment. And what is a plasma environment? It breaks everything up into ions, and even in the science point of view, it's no longer the physicality elements that are in that salt water, but it's the ionic charged particles that are charged fields that are in there. It becomes a whole different ball game, you could say. So I just want to mention a couple things while we hold that idea. While we're looking here, I noticed that argon has the same solubility in water as oxygen, and is 2.5 times more soluble in water than nitrogen. So it's interesting that, for example, one could, through using nanobubble technology, which has been a recent invention, the idea of these tiny wee nanobubbles of argon could, or some other gas, could be introduced into, say, the plasmatic environment of our saltwater reactor combinations. And it could be, that could give it a contained environment that we could experiment with it, similar to the argon that was used in the original Keshe plasma reactors of the patent. And so there's all the
Point is,
gases, in fact, could be put into that environment of the saltwater plasma, and perhaps we could start to create exactly what you were talking about.
well, the thing is that we are actually creating these gases. This is why I was showing you the periodic table last time with the salts, and next to the salts, we have the gases. Because when we put in the potassium, from the potassium, we know in the matter state that it decays to argon, and it also involves a huge energy release. So whenever we have put potassium into our kits, we already have been producing argon. Argon was already in that ball game. And in the Ganser state, this is what Mr. Keshe always explained about those salts, because the salts are so close to the inert gases on the other side of the periodic table. When we have a Ganser state or a plasma state, adding one neutron or one proton is not a big deal. You know, it's like the conversion from nitrogen to carbon or nitrogen to oxygen by this, rubbing or shearing of the elements on themselves or on each other. So in the Ganser states, it's easy to convert salts into noble gases. And this is what I was explaining last time, that if we have an enclosure and we have the right salts in, or alkali metals, let's call them like this.
Alkali, right.
Yes. If we have the right ingredients in the reaction pot, then we are creating out of those salts the fields of the inert gases. And then we have exactly the same setup as described in the patent application, where we have the layering of the noble gases, and then the scintillation source that ignites the whole process is basically the radiation, the gamma ray coming from the potassium. So this is what I'm trying to explain for some time, that through this simple setup or these simple tools that we've been already using, we already have all the ingredients. Just we have to understand the conversion processes that are involved, that from the starter elements, from the material states, the ingredients that we put in the reaction pot, how we come to the result of what is, for example, described in the patent application as this special reactor that creates different forces and stuff. So we already have these ingredients, the inert gases, by using the salts. We are just converting the salts to the inert gases. And then, for example, the light effects inside are already happening, but we don't want the light effect to be seen inside. We want to see the reaction outside. So, for example, if you take a look at this steel ball, you remember the Brazilian steel ball or the African steel ball, which was found in the middle of nowhere. You remember these posts? Anyone with me? I think those were also plasma power units that someone built, and these reactors were enclosed in steel because those metals, steel or iron, for example, absorbs a lot of these fields. But there is a certain strength of light that can't be contained. Like, for example, we've been talking about the neutrinos. And then once you create a strong light inside so that the metal can't hold onto it, it comes out, and that light is then the light of the spaceship.
Or it wouldn't necessarily have to be metal that's containing the reaction. Mr. Keshe has mentioned that, for example, stainless steel, which is a type of steel, is perhaps one of the worst types of material to create a reactor with. It's hard
Well,
to nano coat and so on.
it could be ceramic. I don't know. It definitely needs to be something that can be nano coated in the inside, I think, so that we have a complete nano coated surface, because that nano coated surface will be that black body radiation source. It needs to be a capacitor, and it needs to be this infrared light source, because the whole thing goes from one side, from the gamma ray, or if you go higher than gamma ray, then you have this light of the neutron, or the light of the creator. There's endless strength, endless frequency, or the ether. That's the magnetic and gravitational highways of the universe, or however you may call them. And then on the other side, you have the infrared, the boundary, and it's this feeding of the stronger to the weaker, and the interaction of the infrared with the high frequency light that creates these different materials. For example, I think it's the plasmatic field of the neutron that's created in this reactor. And if you can adjust the amount of creation of, for example, how much neutron you would like to have, for example, through your emotions, then you can guide your craft, because each star has a different composition of these fields, of how much neutron they contain, to say it in material words. And then you can adjust, okay, I want that much neutron as it links, for example, to the moon. And then you get attracted to the moon, because like with like.
Can I ask Lauren a question or two?
Mm-hmm.
We know it's every man's obligation to investigate and understand this knowledge and the plasma technology and so on. But the soul that's within you, I feel that it understands this like the back of its hand. Because when Mr. Keshe said that somebody could get in an accident and the soul could see that accident coming and it wasn't time to separate, it can vaporize the physicality instantaneously and then put it back all together and walk away from the accident. So I think the soul understands this like the back of its hand. It's our physicality that we have to investigate and reach a level of understanding like you have with this. But our soul knows it already. Yeah.
I don't know nothing. I'm just a guy who's enthusiastic and have some time to do research on YouTube, and I've been listening attentively to what's been taught and what's been said. I don't know nothing about these things. I have no schooling in these topics. I'm just able to read and probably understand some of the words. Even English is my second language, so whatever.
But you understand a little bit of the soul, yes?
I don't even know that.
I understand.
I just want to. The thing is, the reason why I'm coming here is I would like to share ideas, because I have a feeling that whenever I share and some of it goes through, I mean, like some of the understanding goes through to the group, I have the possibility of opening more doors, because as long as we're not in that state you were talking about, that the soul already knows how to do it, but we're not in the practice of doing it, because we can't turn it on and off like the light switch. I would like to achieve this kind of consciousness and level of awareness and soul interaction you've been explaining about, not only in the state of emergency, like when we're threatened or our body is threatened, but I would like, for example, my children to be able to do it whenever they want, like playing tag in the universe. And if they wanted to play tag in the universe and not only on the playground in physical state. And for this future and to be present. I mean, like to arrive in the present. I'm adhering to the means of teaching that Mr. Keshe has been giving us, and the principles that it should be free. I mean, like we all should be doing it, and everyone should be able to understand it. And this is why I'm bringing up stuff from Wikipedia and these things that we've already been hearing about, and connecting them in an acceptable manner, hopefully acceptable manner, so that, you know, it's not about one person understanding parts, but it's about a group of people becoming enlightened. We're I think in our present time, it's not about one Jesus or one Muhammad or one prophet, but it's about a group of people, like, for example, what we call the Universal Council, that work together and share understanding. And in this group, the Keshe Plasma Reactor group, with the guidance of Rick, I think we have the task of, you know, being able to be hands-on, and to be able to be hands-on and achieving results, and not only, you know, playing with toys that are only part of the whole picture, and like this being in some respect frustrated that we don't see effects. I want to inspire and share knowledge, and invite other people to think and bring feedback about and more knowledge, so that we can play together with all these things. You understand?
Yes, yes, we teach each other. And you mentioned children, and Gianni shared a beautiful story about his daughter, I think, understanding the plasma technology at a very early age. You may want to hear that public teaching earlier. Rick, wasn't that shared
Yeah, that
yesterday?
was in the
Yes, but it's not his daughter. It's a girl that friendly with the family, himself and his wife or girlfriend.
I just thought I'd bring that up. Thank you for sharing, Lauren.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, go ahead.
Adora es mi hermana de alma.
Adora is my sister from my heart.
Y para el equipo Petrila es el alma del equipo.
And for the Petrila group, she's the soul of the group.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, before we go on, I just wanted to mention what Jedi Simon's been putting into the chat here, a number of paragraphs of information. And it's interesting because if we look at the information about outer space, what we call outer space, or what the scientists have been discovering with their various detectors, and they detect these gamma ray bursts coming from various sectors of the universe. It's hard to tell sometimes exactly where they're coming from, but now they've set up ways that they can do that. And we were just talking about these gamma rays, and they've found, as the Jedi mentions in his writings here in the chat, that there's blazers which are powered by the material falling into a supermassive black hole at the center of the host galaxy. So you'll have these jets that appear from the center of the galaxies, and they have these intense fields, magnetic fields, and powerful winds, and so on. And this is a toroidal disk, this whole, the way the flow is in this thing that's called a galaxy. And they extend out way out into the galaxy from that central black hole, these jets, and they can emit incredible amounts of these gamma ray emissions. So if you were to be straight on to one of these jets, then you'd be in the stream of very powerful gamma ray emissions that would pretty much break down whatever is in its path into its primary elements, let's say. And we can imagine that same principle going on within the cells of our body, within the elements, especially with the potassium K40 and its transmutation that occurs. And these little jets of high energy light are being shot through our body, essentially, and are responsible for various transmutations that are usually required within the body. It's not necessarily a bad thing that's going on. And as we talked about, in the case of a child, it's responsible for the duplication and replication of the DNA, the splitting of the splitting that takes place has to happen through radioactive means. So it's like a knife. The radiation is like a knife that's able to split the DNA and enable a new cell to reproduce. So just wanted to make that analogy there. Thank you, Jedi, for that. It brings in the macro to the micro, and it's all the same type of processes going on. If we look at the processes of space and galaxies, we can get some good feedback as to the micro and nano structures, the interactions going on at that level within a reactor that's somewhere in between. It's not nano and it's not macro in terms of a universe, but it might be baseball sized reactor that we're trying to contain our nano experiments in effect. Okay, I just want to mention that. We have Thomas with his hand up. Would you like to go ahead there, Thomas?
Hey, Rick, I was just trying to get into the chat there, but I've been following, I guess, since the talk started, and I've been playing around with a few things recently. I wasn't ready to get called right now, but let me find my materials and I'll get back to you in a few minutes.
Okay. Okay, anyone else like to go ahead with a comment or question or video of their flying device? So I throw that in there. I know someday someone's going to take me up on it.
Well, I know that we are going to hear something about the egg as a dental chair. And if you don't know what the egg is, I think you can see the 296 Knowledge Seekers workshop on YouTube. And we all have concerns about teeth, cracking, fillings, cavities, different. Apparently this chair, which this is not the exact item, but it is a takeoff on this item, will be used as a dental chair. And I'll let your imagination work with that. I don't think you'll be hearing any drills or anything like that. But Mr. Keshe is going to, on the Knowledge Seekers workshop, I believe this week, we'll be discussing this chair as a dental unit. Of course, one of the 1,000 things he's going to talk about.
I would kindly point you to the 107th Knowledge Seekers workshop. Caroline has been sharing it on public platforms again, because all the things that are built into this system have already been explained earlier. We just forgot about it, as usual. So I think the technologies used inside here are in part the Magravh units in star formation setup, like, you know, turned 90 degrees, not flat cores, and the Ganses, like Mr. Keshe explained about how we should create the Ganses in these ice cube boxes, where we create different kind of Ganses in a specific environment. You know, like create the Ganses together, not in separate boxes, but with like in a checkerboard style setup.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's hard for us to second guess what's in there. He did give us some clues.
Yes, he gave us some clues. I'm not a medical person. I don't know anything about how a mother's womb is set up, and supposedly this device creates the fields of the mother's womb, so that creates the balancing effect. That's what I've heard or understood.
One thing for sure is, and I have some experience with, is when you're inside a structure like this, that as you see, it slides and becomes, when it closes, it becomes like an egg-like structure, or basically an enclosed, a tightly enclosed space that's not like a room. It's like, you know you're inside something like a submarine, or it's not a usual place that most of us find ourselves. We wouldn't go into a closet, for example, shut the door and experience that, because unless we're hiding from something or whatever. But in this case, if you find yourself just inside of some kind of enclosed structure like that, it becomes, first of all, it's quiet. It's much quieter than the existing room wherever you came from, that might be in a some commercial building somewhere downtown or something. It might be outside noises going on. If you're in a well-designed structure like this, then it's quiet, and right away that changes everything. You can, as my mother would say, you can then hear yourself think. It's too noisy, so noisy I couldn't hear myself think, she used to say. And so we need quiet to hear ourselves, to get in touch with ourselves. And also just the design of that environment, the way the edges are all smooth and white and kind of bright and inviting in many ways, and relaxing. All of that is conducive to an environment to help us get in touch with ourselves. And then if you can create the actual magnetic gravitational as well from various means of creating fields through the Ganses, through reactors and whatnot, then bingo, you can really amplify that idea of an enclosed environment. I made something like this back in, I think it was 1988 or something like that, probably. And it was, no, before then, 83 or 4. And it was a chamber about this size, a little bit less diameter. And it was a tube. And you would open the side of it and climb inside this tube, which had a rough bed on the bottom part of it, just laying on the bottom part of this tube, and you would lie in there and shut the door to this tube. I called it the plasmatron at that. I call it the cosmotron at that time, and and it was incredible what would happen. I tried it out a number of times to see how it would be. And you could play music or other you know, inductions or whatever inside the environment. And it had ability for air to get in so you wouldn't be asphyxiated. But it was very, very quiet. It was designed to be quiet. So you would lie down inside in the quiet and either listen to specific chosen music or a specific kind of self-suggestion, induction, various things that could be attempted. And the result was that instead of, like, normally when we lie down, that's time as humans, we're usually exhausted and it's time to go to sleep. We don't usually, unless we're into meditation or something, we don't normally lie down and close our eyes because it's also very dark is the other thing. So between the lack of audio input, which we normally have around us, there's always things going on. I just turned off my refrigerator because I know it is background noise. It adds to the background noise. I've got fans running now, and that's what you hear in the microphone from the computer. It's a bit noisy. And so you enter into a space like this, it's almost perfectly quiet. And that's a shock to our system. The other thing is, if there's no light, in the case of the device that I put together, that's another stimulus that gets removed, you could say, or is no longer part of our input. And the visual is a big part of our input. When we close our eyes, it's a totally different set of sensing that we use. And so in darkness, you know, our senses expand in a way. Our ability to use our skin as a sensing device and feel the environment and so on is much more strong in the darkness or when we have our eyes closed. So just between those two things, and if we're not moving, so we don't have a lot of sensation to deal with, and the sense of smell, of course, there's less smell and so on. It becomes what they call what used to be called sensory deprivation chamber in a way, in that our senses are less prevalent in that environment. And that allows us actually to go inside rather than to be relying on the external stimulus and our normal senses that we use to sense our external environment. And in that relaxing situation where those stimuli are taken away or are not available to us, then we naturally go into that sort of cocooning mode, and we can go deep inside then and access some of the deeper layers of our emotion that are no longer fixated on the stuff of the environment, all the things we see and hear and sense in other ways. So just from that alone creates a certain environment right away. And then I'm sure Mr. Keshe has ways and means that between him and the doctors that know how to create specific environments for the physicality and indeed for the soul, because that's where the true healing comes from, is that connection. So what you're trying to do in the situation is to try to make that connection between that deep inner part of ourselves where the soul resides and the you know, our normal consciousness. So you can definitely see how that would work. And there are isolation chambers for what what sometimes they call flotation tanks or flotation chamber, where you lie in a liquid of predominantly Epsom salts. That's magnesium sulfate, a large percentage, lots and lots of salt in water, enough that you float in a few inches of water. And it feels like you are truly floating, especially if you get in one where, again, you have no light to connect with and no sound to connect with, and you're left with whatever's left over when you don't have those stimuli, which is you. So they're stuck with you in a way. But that's where we make this, we have the chance or opportunity to make a deep connection. And that's what people find with these so-called isolation chambers or flotation tanks, which are available in just about every city now as a center for flotation tanks.
You got the isobaric also chambers, where you're in a chamber, closed chamber full of oxygen, pure oxygen to feed your body when you're short of oxygen.
Yeah, and the other
And
one
what,
for
yeah.
divers that's under pressure, it's just atmosphere or maybe extra oxygen, but it's under high pressure and you're inside this chamber to gradually decompress so you don't get the bends if you came out of the water too fast.
This unit, I would say your soul interacts with the soul of this unit. And that's what it takes you back to the uterus of your mother, and you sort of recreate your birth and go back to the conditions you were in when you were born, with no
Quite
problems
possible.
in your health.
Well, some people are born with problems in their health, but generally, yes. Well, that's when the essence is pure and doesn't have all the knots and anomalies that we tend to accumulate as humans by going through this thing called life.
Yeah, it's rebalancing the soul and the physicality.
Yeah, it's just removal of the layers of conditioning so that we can get closer to the soul. And that's like going back to the womb. It's the room or womb where the soul resides in the center of the brain, and all of the all of the inner and outer layers that are like the layers of that toroid that we looked at earlier. And they can they both protect and encapsulate that soul, but you can get closer to it by moving through the emotions to the ones that are close to the core, and that's where the true healing can take place.
Going back to the original fields that created your characteristics, and you added your own, let's put it, knowledge your soul brought along, or conditions.
And what about the stuff that your father and your mother and
your soul has
all the other people you interact with, and that they've all made changes too that can put bumps and anomalies. And if your father yelled at you or something, then that might tense certain muscles, and the muscles end up with the memories that are knotted up there for the rest of your life until you address it in some kind of counseling or therapy. And then it becomes ironed out. You get those knots ironed out, and bingo, then you feel like you're enlightened and can carry on better because you're more connected to that soul connection.
Your original soul has imposed those conditions on itself to be able to learn.
Sure.
That soul has chosen.
Once it learns, maybe it doesn't still need to have the maybe the physicality doesn't need to still have the knots in the body, and a good massage might alleviate some of that distress, let's say, of the soul's adventures.
Well,
You're an
once the
adventurous soul.
soul has learned what he came for, he's free to leave.
Yes, but there might be many learning experiences along the way to get to that big learning of what you came here for and don't need to be here anymore, let's say.
Yeah, well, you yourself has imposed those conditions. It's nothing else but yourself, your soul.
Mm-hmm.
The soul knows what it has to learn. It goes down the path and chooses the different pathways he has to travel, and then he'll realize if he's made a mistake or not, and what he has learned and what he hasn't, and what he has to repeat in his next life.
Can I ask a question, please?
Go ahead, Jalal, please.
Thank you, John. Hi, Rick. Hi, everyone. It's about the potassium and why he is emitting this field. Do anyone really know why?
The physical condition or the soul condition?
The physical condition.
I think Lauren can answer you.
He might. Do you remember the teaching of Mr. Cash when he speaks about the immune system and how it's work?
The hormones?
The
Or the
immune system.
immune? The
The
immune.
system. We call it here immune system. The immune system.
Perhaps some.
What is the immune system based on? Calcium. Who is stronger than calcium? Potassium. So always in the plasma knowledge, the stronger give to the weaker to bring it to his level.
I would also add, we're always thinking of materials, but think of those different materials and levels of different levels of hydrogen and its power or strength. It's all hydrogen at different levels.
Yeah, you can.
Did you make your point, Jalal? The stronger feeds the weaker, potassium feeding the calcium. But
Yeah.
how does that relate to us and our immune?
This small feeding energy from the potassium going to the calcium to raise it to its level, Mr. Cash call it is changing from alpha to beta. This is small, very, very small and very very quick giving in the field of both of them. It's trying to raise the calcium to the level of the potassium, and this trigger this ray. I understand it from Mr. Cash, but I don't remember exactly the words because he say it in really scientific words, but the understanding of it.
And also changing from alpha to beta is just changing the frequency, levels of energy.
Yeah, and that's maybe why it's emit this gamma ray.
So are these rays vibrating electrons or are they in plasma state, field state?
Everything,
Plasmatic.
everything in your body is in the plasma state. We are speaking about the body.
What about the light in the body?
Also on the plasma state.
Yeah, a light ray is plasma.
I do recall Mr. Keshe saying that the bones actually were semi-plasmatic, as I understand it. The denseness of the amount of material that your bone structure encases itself is more or less like another nano coating. So you have sort of sub-environments within the body structure. Um, I'm trying to remember the exact term he used, but he said it was not fully plasmatic in general.
Well,
Nanostructure.
bone, yeah. Bones are like a sponge. You got the mainly cavities, and the structure is sort of a material cavernous state, which is in what is it, 95% plasma inside, and the what holds it is that calcium and some amounts of potassium, I imagine. And what is the percentage of calcium and potassium we have in our body? It's less than 2%. It's nothing. Remember the table of the percentages of the different elements we've got in our body. Mainly hydrogen and oxygen and carbon. Think of hydrogen as these percentages are taken by weight. Hydrogen is the most highest content element in our body.
Yeah, I was just checking out the wiki, and calcium is the most of all the minerals of our body. Trying to figure out, I keep talking about requirements, so I'm trying to figure out how much actual calcium there is in the body.
Yeah, we've seen those tables in percentages.
Yeah.
If you can find that table, and think that those percentages are in weight. And calcium is much heavier than hydrogen.
Calcium accounts to 1 to 2% of the human body weight. Over 99% of the calcium in the body is found in the teeth and bones. All right, so if you weighed 100 kilograms, there'd be a kilogram or two of calcium, basically. I think we found out about potassium already. Potassium says about 140 grams in the body compared to a kilogram or two of the calcium.
And think that calcium is 40 times heavier than hydrogen. So think of the quantity of atoms of each one of them. Divide 2% by 40, and that gives you the percentage in the quantity of atoms of the relation between hydrogen and calcium. 2 divided by 40, that's 0.05%.
Percent what?
Of atoms in your body. If you've got 7 trillion atoms, 0.05% is calcium.
Who says there's 7 trillion atoms?
Mr. Keshe said that, so.
I thought it's 7 trillion cells.
Well, cells, yeah, you're right there.
So there's way more atoms.
Well, has he said atoms or well?
Each gram has 6 times, 10 to the 23rd sort of amount of atoms. So it's way more than trillions.
Yeah.
So you can't use that sort of relationship so much. In any case, where are we here?
Hello, this is Lawrence.
Hi, Lawrence.
I just wanted to say that consider this device a radiation device, but a plasmatic radiation device. So whenever we talk about the calcium that is our bones, we're talking in the background about the potassium that's been converted to calcium through this energetic exchange. Because when you were talking about the immune system, Mr. Keshe was explaining about the immune system exactly in this context of the immune system building on the radiation sources. So that's the energy of the radiation is being used for what we call the immune system, and this is why we have bones everywhere in our body. So whenever I think we're talking about this device that's shown on the screen, this egg that's supposedly be working like the mother's womb. If you take a look at how eggs are formed in the chicken, they first are created the yolk and so the white and the yellow stuff, and then at the last step, the shell, the calcium is created. I've even seen some scientific experiment where they managed to grow chicken without forming the calcium outer shell. But the point is that the calcium is a product of different interactions at the end. And all the interactions that come before the calcium, even if you think about how we as human beings are being formed in the mother's womb, we don't have strong bones when we are born. We have flexible, soft something which contains calcium, but is far from the original bone that we will have when we're grown up. So
yeah, like a rubber bone.
Yeah, we should go back to the health teachings and take a look about what Mr. Keshe has been explaining about the composition of our skin and the evolution of our skin in the mother's womb, because our brain and all other organs in some respect grow out of those 3 layers. And I think this device has a setup which contains fields that nourish those original 3 layers. And once you nourish the basic structure, the original setup, which has, say, expanded or evolved into what we presently call body, then basically you can go back into that energetic state where the body can regrow itself. So just like we've grown bone by the decay of potassium to calcium, I think there are all other elements that are needed for the growth of the other cells to rebalance the body. So I think we are creating the energetic state of the lymph system, as we presently call it or use it, but not in the inside of the body, but outside, so that we have energies, radiation available for any cell in the body. And the reason why it's promoted or explained like this is that when we go with a spaceship, or when we go without the spaceship and we are somewhere out in the universe, we will have just the same energies, those universal fields at our disposal, and we will have to balance both our soul and our body if we take it with us, with them. So this is a balancing device that works just as a, so I always say to people in terms of explanation in this plasma technology, that no one is feeding the sun with a spoon, and no one's feeding the earth with a spoon, and still they are shining and moving and stuff like this. So there's got to be energies that we haven't understood up until yet that makes the universe go round. So if we're made up of the same thing, so soul is soul, then we should also be able to work with this. And this is so when we were in the womb, we were still aware as a soul of the knowledge and the operations of how to access this universal field. And I've been thinking a lot about capacitors in the last few days, because you know, whenever we have 2 kind of materials and a space gap in between, or 2 fields, for example, a magnetic and a gravitational, and a space gap in between, we basically have a capacitor. So we should be thinking in terms of these capacitors and the interaction of charge in between the 2 plates, the anode and the cathode, if we go from the material state. And all these interactions, for example, the discharge of potassium, why potassium has such a big power in terms of radiation, is I think in some to be found somewhere in the difference of what it has in terms of protons and neutrons. But so in this kind of capacitance of their system, I don't quite understand how it works, because if you took a look at argon, argon has a bigger difference in terms of 18 and 22. Argon 40 has 18 protons and 22 neutrons. Potassium has 19 and 21, potassium 40. So it's a smaller difference in the number of, in between the number of neutrons and protons, but still it has it discharges energy in the direction of argon, which has a bigger difference, so a bigger imbalance in some respect. The most balanced of the 3 is the calcium with 2020, but still it works as a capacitor in some respect.
It's
So
what Mr. Keshe, yeah, it's what Mr. Keshe calls a PN junction.
Rick, do you recall the exact name? Weren't there 2 names, Mr. Keshe, said this unit could be called? The Universal GANs Enhancement Unit? He mentioned,
I've seen that one used before. It's on the actual website. If I can get it up here.
And going back to the calcium, the majority of our calcium is in our skull. The skull is the strongest and most thickest bone, densest. If you've ever tried to cut open a dry skull, you realize the difference between the hardness of that bone and any other bone in your body.
The Universal Enhancement Spaceship Unit is what it's called in the KF Global /business/our products. The Universal Enhancement Spaceship Unit.
Well, Mr. Keshe put this name not to mix this up with the conventional medicine units, sort of saying, no, I'm pointing towards space and not on Earth.
Yeah, he always brings it back to the space technology, with some applications on Earth too.
Yes, to avoid the confrontation with the medicine manufacturers.
Well, that's one reason, but he's always gone for the space,
Yeah.
for all the products.
Yeah, and as an upgrade of this system in the next conference, it will show how to create materials with this device, or with a similar device that has a little bit of different setup inside. So it's an iteration of on the same topic on how to create matter out of fields. And this is why I showed you this pair production Wikipedia article, because there's a gamma ray that in itself, through the interaction with matter, with a proton, with a hydrogen, creates an electron. So if we have strong sources of light, through the interaction of the different kinds of light, you know, ultraviolet is the strong light, the strong plasma, infrared light is the weak plasma, and through their interaction, they create whatever you want inside or in between. For example, materials, depending on the difference and the strengths of the one plasma interacting with the other plasma.
Yeah, but you're thinking the other way around. You're thinking of plasma going to light. No, light going to plasma. It's the other way around. It's plasma going back to light. The deterioration of plasma is light, or the interaction.
Well,
if you go back to,
do you want to create it or destroy it?
It's always one plasma. It's always one plasma as what we call creation. There's the misunderstanding that arises is of the interaction of matter creating what we see as visible light, or the light spectrum that we currently use as it's light, it's daylight. Plasma itself is also light, but the light of the creator. So that's a different dimension or a different level of light. And the reason why sorry?
But that light is magnetism. You
Yes.
remember this, if you read the structure of light, you got the magnetism ray that goes down to matter state, light, when it comes to the amino acids or any other matter state.
Yes, I think the scaffolding goes from the magnetism ray or the light ray, the gamma ray itself is also a light ray starting from potassium. And out of that ray, we then create the plasmatic environment that creates the light of the deuterium plasma. This is why I brought you this deuterium lamp and ultraviolet as a lower scale light earlier, because there was another step to be understood, that even that deuterium light is something that can create what we call matter interactions. And then if you go to the gamma ray and you go above the gamma ray, take a look at the Gabriel's horn. Whenever we are talking about rays or lights, we are already in the material plane in some respect. We're on that level that we are interacting with in the matter state. But the light, just as the plasma, because even matter is plasma, is connected with the universal field. And whenever we want to do something for real, I mean, like for in the deeper sense, we have to work with the universal fields. We have two highways, a magnetic and a gravitational highway. And on the matter level, the way I can explain is that the magnetic is, say, the ultraviolet, and the infrared is the gravitational. And through the interaction of these lights, just like the Michelson-Morley experiment, where we split a beam, and through the difference of speed of those lights, we had an interaction and we created material. Exactly with the interaction of those different strengths of lights. So one light is, for example, magnetic, giving, and as it slows down, becomes gravitational. So one is the ultraviolet, the other is the infrared. And once you create the conditions for the ultraviolet to be present, with the infrared to be present, this is why we have the gamma ray from the potassium as the ultraviolet source. And then we have this black body radiation from the nanocoating, from the black surface. We have an infrared as the black surface and the potassium as a broad spectrum and high energy source. And the interaction of the two then create higher dimensional interactions based on the same principle. So we will have higher energies than what we presently call gamma rays available, rays that are at the infinite strength level, the ether. And on the other side, we will also have fields that are weaker than the infrared, more gravitational, more in the center. So if we take the torus example that we've been talking about in the beginning, we are always going more into the center of the torus, more into the field strength that's at the source of creation or at the end of creation, depending on which way you want to look at this line of light. Because creation itself is one line, which one half of it is magnetic, the other half of it is gravitational. And they themselves, through their interaction, always create space gaps. And because this one line has a space gap, it's a capacitor. And once in the third iteration or third going through the center, it comes back and interacts on itself, the first magnetic and gravitational turns that it has taken, then it creates matter. So whenever they are not connecting, once they when there's only two field lines, that same light, which has only gone twice through the center of the torus, then there's no interaction, because there's only, the light hovering above the waters. It's a capacitor. But once you have the third interaction and it creates a turbulence, then you create what we call the matter state, or the feedback of existence. And this device is basically creating fields creating a radiation environment, a plasmatic radiation environment that involves all these principles to, create the conditions for our balancing.
Okay, sounds good to me. We have Jedi had a picture that he wanted to bring up here. Let me do a share.
This egg does look accommodating.
So this is a picture of the helmet apparatus from Dr. Rodrigo from a couple of years ago, I believe. Different viewpoints of it. Which incorporates, you can see the coils, the sort of 3D coils, I guess you call them. They're in two different planes. And
We're still seeing the egg.
you don't see the whole desktop. Can you not see this thing here?
No, no thing there. Just the egg picture is here, open.
I can see in front of the egg, the helmet picture.
Yeah, you should see the helmet picture, Mark.
Why am I not seeing it? I'm looking right at it.
Probably because you have some sort of lag or something going on. I don't know. Try,
No problem.
it's odd. I'll share it directly. You should be able to see it then.
You can see both of them in YouTube and in Zoom.
Yeah, I shared my whole desktop, but maybe it's not working for him for some reason. Okay, you should be able to see it there now, the image of the helmet.
YouTube has about a 30-second lag.
Yeah, but Mark's in Zoom, so he should be able to see that.
Yeah, I see just the egg picture, but that's okay, Rick. Continue, please.
You're still in this environment, Mark.
I'll just visualize.
It must be pretty slow at your end there for some reason. Any case, I think most of us can see this picture of the helmet, the health helmet from Dr. Rodrigo's. And so Jedi had a question, is this the same concept as the egg, the health egg? And it may have some of the same parts. It may be possible that the so-called health egg or the enhancement spaceship could have these kinds of coils built into it or generate similar types of fields. I think perhaps it might be closer to the devices from the Austrian Keshe Foundation, which are similar looking devices, but on a tripod sort of situation.
I think there are two main differences because the health unit use GANS balls or balls with GANS water inside. So this is really 360 degrees. And these are only, if you want to say, two dimension, horizontal and vertical. And I think the main difference is that the egg system has a pulse. So the system is pulsing. They diluted one or two balls so that we can see the pulsing in these balls. And different people were sitting in this unit, so the pulse of the system changed. So I think these copper coils are not having any pulse system.
Good point. Yes, good point. The pulse was emphasized by Mr. Keshe, and the one person got into the device and stopped the pulse, in fact, and he talked about that a bit.
Yeah, that was Josef Becker. He was the only guy who was able to stop the pulse. When he was sitting in, it was not pulsing anymore.
Okay, so it may or may not be associated directly with this device. In any case, Mr. Keshe did say that one thing that'll happen if anyone tries to find out how the machine works, it will destroy the ability for it to work. So essentially, it's a sealed unit that it will ruin its active component by trying to see what the active component is. So I think that's a big clue, actually, because
Well,
I don't think it'll be just like a rotating GANS reactor. In fact, it probably won't be rotating because there's no power to the unit as well, unless there's a battery unit or something like that for making
it's the
motors turn on.
potassium that's the power. Potassium 40 is the power. It's
Well, that could
huge
be
power.
something like that could be the source, let's say, for.
You know, in this system, in this egg system that you're seeing here, as with all the new systems that are going to be coming out, there's a non-dimensional, non-tangible item added to it, which we all know what that is.
The soul.
That's correct.
But I would like to make one small correction, Rick. This device in Vienna, what was shown, was connected to a plug. So there were two Magraths systems, one for the right and one for the left side, and they were connected to a plug. And Mr. Keshe explained that after this month, when they introduced this self-charging battery in Mexico, they will improve that device so that it does not need a connection to a power grid system, because that will influence the efficiency of the system. So it makes it weaker because you are somehow grounded over this connection to the grid.
Okay, that makes sense.
And imagine tampering with this unit, trying to figure out how it works, and that non-tangible item leaves it. And it could never work, even though nothing was tampered with. Like you didn't take out any GANs, or you didn't remove anything, or this or that. But that non-dimensional, non-tangible item has realized what's going on and has left the unit. Now it won't work.
Yeah,
I would say it's.
I wouldn't want to be responsible for that.
Consider if it's like the stuff that we have in the patent, that there are gases inside. If you open up a device that has gases inside, the gases will leak, and then the interaction that's fueled by the gases will stop. It's just like, you know, cracking open a human skull, the human will die. And it's the same with these devices, I guess, that if you break them open, the field interaction that's inside, that's fueling the outer effects, will just simply stop. And like this, you won't be able to discern or decipher what's been going on. So there's no point in cracking those open. If you understand,
like breaking a fluorescent light bulb or You know, it worked fine before, but if you break it, then it doesn't have its gases contained anymore and it no longer functions.
And that's only at the level of material gases or the thinking of material
Right.
gases. But we
If
go
we
when
think of entities rather than gases, then those entities also no longer have that life in that sphere or whatever it is that's been broken.
or they just
Seal's been
simply
broken.
leak into the environment, just like it's been explained before, where the power goes because it's been connected with the grid, because we've been connecting lots of our devices to the grid. It's just simply a leak of power to the environment. Once you crack the device open or you want to try to decipher what's inside because you're looking for the materials that are being used, if it's only a hollow sphere because it's been loaded with fields of plasma, then once you open it up, all the fields leak into the environment and there you go. Nothing will work as it used before because earlier the fields were contained and now you let them go. The nano coating that we've been using is, I think, a field container. This is why I brought up this black body radiation thing, because anytime we've been nano coating, we've been creating surfaces that were quite black. And they were also, because of the nano coating, you know, super resistive and super conductive. So much of what we are used to in terms of electricity and resistance and conductivity in matter state will be contained by this thing. And Mr. Keshe also explained that when he was tasked to contain radiation for in the nuclear reactor, because those bolts were oxidizing or whatever, and they had a problem, he solved it in the 70s by using nano-coated material. Even the Fukushima decontamination solution involved using simple nano-coated screws and metals and whatever they found, and then throwing them on fields. So the point is that I want to make is that whenever you break the containment of these plasmatic fields or units, you have a leakage and the system will not work as it used to before. Most probably, I would say that these devices are designed that you once fill them up, then you close them, and then you leave them working forever. Most probably, they don't need any maintenance, and most probably, there are no deteriorating parts in them that would diminish their operations for a few hundred years.
You got similar problems when the scientists sort of tamper with the God particles in the CERN. They create havoc there.
If the unit does need any power, I know it has a smoke detector and probably an oxygen sensor or something, other different things in there that are required by the certifying European agency. I'm wondering, Rick, do you think the self-powered chip is in there?
In where?
In the unit?
What unit?
The
This
egg
is
unit?
This is a rendering, a 3D rendering. It's not a real unit, so I don't know if it's in there or not.
No, I was just suggesting that this, if it needed any sort of power.
Oh, well, that was just explained that it's plugged in at the workshop, but the next workshop where they're explaining about the self-sufficient energy supply will overcome the issue of having it plugged in temporarily. Plug-in is not so great because of the grounding through the ground system of the grid system and so on.
Okay, so they'll take the plug off and put the self-power in there.
That's the idea. Cut the plug, make it self-standing, and have some sort of energy system. It may be from the potassium, or perhaps there's something else that Mr. Keshe has in mind.
It's the plasma power unit. It's the MAGRAV unit that's involved. I think it's the deuterium, the hydrogen, and the tritium energy levels that the MAGRAV power unit is generating. And the potassium, or the interaction of the potassium with the argon and the calcium, is just for the creation of these three. So we are creating the energy level ganses with the initial ingredients that we put into the system. And the reason, Mr. Keshe, even you remember when we were looking at the experiments at the American lab, John has been showing us different setups with multiple MAGRAV units connected to the grid. And Mr. Keshe has always been explaining that their spaceship is not flying because they're grounded, because they leashed it. It's a leak of plasma when we have a connector or system connected to the grid. The only reason I think these devices are used in this way at the present moment is firstly because we were still wanting to get electron volts out of the device to use it as a energy, like voltaic energy generation device, instead of appreciating its plasma power device, appreciating it as a plasma power device. And secondly, I think the grid was a means of putting load demand onto the system. You remember we were supposed to put the MAGRAV unit at the end of our house, at the furthest end of the energy grid of our house when we were first charging it. I think the reason was because we were not only putting our house as a load onto the system, but also the whole energy grid. So basically the power plant of our country or of our city too. And the reason is because, you know, stronger feeds the weaker. Through the MAGRAV unit, the plasma of the universe was feeding the weaker, not only our house, but also the whole grid that we were connecting with. And if we're good at it or understand it, and we go lower, and then we, our souls, can become the load onto the MAGRAV unit, or we as feeders start feeding what is connected to us through the MAGRAV unit as a power converter. And then basically we don't need to put this electric load, or we don't need to connect to the electric grid as we used to for years. So the load thing is just creating this gradient, the plasmatic gradient. And since we had nothing simpler at disposal, we use the electric grid because we want to get power out, where in effect we just created a demand on the plasma.
No, my thinking was that if Mr. Keshe is going to put his self-powered chip into somebody else's cell phone or someone else's car, wouldn't he put it into his own unit? Yeah.
Sure, that makes sense.
I think he will. I think the system is designed to be self-powered from the beginning. The reason why it's not been disclosed up until now is because we're lacking the understanding of how it works. We will definitely get a teaching on how we are doing it, because it's the same with our we don't need to eat and we don't need to drink, we just need to breathe for some time topic. Once we understand how these systems work, we will also understand how we can feed our bodies through our soul. It's the same proposition or the same context, just on another variation of the same theme. We just
Go ahead.
we're not ready yet, or we have not understood yet as a group, as a population. We are in this respect responsible, and should catch up. Catch up.
Well, Mr. Keshe said the individual that did stop the heartbeat, whatever that is, I'm not understanding that per se, had fell in love with the unit and had found balance in the unit.
I think the heartbeat is like the capacitor charging and discharging. That's the physical analogy that I would suggest. And when you're stopping the heartbeat, you become one with the unit. Basically, you merge with it energetically, and then the whole system, you and the unit, through, for example, your soul, will still be discharging, because as long as you beat, as long as you have a heartbeat, as long as you have a soul, you will be one with the whole, with the beat of the universe, even though it's basically without a frequency. So I think it's just like when lovers hold their breaths in awe of each other. That's, I think, what happened with the guy. I agree with you.
All right, very good. Thomas, are you ready yet with your presentation?
I was patiently waiting in the background. It's been a very active class or teaching, so it's great. But yeah, I just have a few things to share. Pertaining to the toroidal I guess structure you guys mentioned at the beginning. Been playing with Marco Rodin's toroid for the last year and a bit. And I also wanted to read actually something that Walter Russell wrote probably close to 80 years ago. And it was in reference to, I think Mark mentioned, Keshe was saying that the soul's ability to dematerialize and restructure its entirety in a flash, and this fellow apparently did it. And he said that when he was 17, he was commanded to demonstrate power that was drawn from a source that was within me rather than from a source outside of me. And he said, then I died. Then I had one of the most dreadful diseases that could afflict humankind, the bubonic plague. It was called black diphtheria. Doctors had taken cultures from my throat, which were blacker than a case knife. Black diphtheria had destroyed my throat and shut off my breathing. And then I died. I was pronounced dead by one doctor. 2 others were called in, and they pronounced me dead also. They sent for the undertaker. The undertaker had arrived. The soul does not leave the body right away. The consciousness does not. The awareness of the purpose that I must fulfill gave me knowledge of healing principle right then and there. And I was commanded that I should use it upon myself. I did. And once again, I was strongly alive in the body. I rose from that bed and I was well. The doctors were amazed. My father was sitting by my bedside weeping. I couldn't gather my senses all at once, and I wondered why he was weeping. I said, "Don't cry, father. I'll put that coal in." The last thing I remembered before I became ill was that I was supposed to put a ton of coal in through the cellar window Everyone was amazed. I'm not dead, I said. I'm thoroughly well. And yeah, Walter Russell's an interesting fellow. He actually found the isotopes for hydrogen in like the 20s before our technological advances were able to detect such elements. So very interesting fellow for those that have not researched into his work. But can you promote me? I don't think I could share right now, Rick.
Okay.
Does anyone have a 3D printer? I guess not. I would highly recommend one. They're perfect for plasmatic devices. Rick, it says I can't share because someone else is sharing. Alrighty, can you see the coil?
Yeah.
Great. So this was using Marco Rodin's structure. He called it many things. The Abba Tori discovered the shape after finding the name of God. But I actually took two of them and in reverse rotation, inlaid one inside of the other. I was actually able to 3D print it. And I've been getting really strong effects with just one of them, swirling GANs around. So the cool thing with 3D printers is that you can get really accurate dimensions, and you would have a really hard time getting a wire even wrapped around in these angles, using sort of discs to hold the wires in place. So this is actually able to 3D print as itself like this, because the inside coil is actually acting as a support for the outside. And my idea was to have two different Ganses, and they're both sort of I guess that's a decent view of it. Sort of counterbalancing each other, and it is a perfect toroidal form. The inside diameter is in the golden mean ratio to the outside proportion. So my mother was my first guinea pig with this system, and she basically drove a knife through her hand and severed a tendon that was responsible for the motion of her middle and index finger, or middle and ring finger, I forget which one it was. And basically I had a little coil set up like this with GANs, the four main GANs is pumping around, and it took away all of her pain, but her nerve response was far beyond what the doctors were saying was a normal sort of recovery rate, which they said for an injury like that would have been sort of 6 to 9 months of mobility, which she had in about a month. and she loved it. She would just put her hand on the outside, and you could feel a really strong, actually, temperature difference as you go closer towards the inside when you spin GANs with. But this is actually a model that I was going to release out on the web. So my question was if anyone had a 3D printer, if you could help do some tests and experiment with this one. My time is sort of limited, but if anyone wanted to volunteer for that one, it'd be greatly appreciated. And let me see that. That's it 3D printed.
I think we see the same picture.
Okay. Sure that's right.
Ah,
Yeah, so that's it 3D printed. I've also used this structure as a shield. If you make it big enough, you could put a little ping pong ball inside there and spin it, and that creates a world of difference. It's night and day. So, and I'll show you what that setup looks like. So this one's a little bigger, just for that aspect of putting a reactor inside. And yeah, it's I think it's getting closer towards a complete system. The cool thing with the reactor technology is in GANs itself is basically you change the environment and the GANs itself would change. So having that outer shield completely changes the dynamics of the reactor. So, you know, maybe you had a field strength of carbon at the initial beginning, but when you put it inside this, you might get it to the strength of gold, and who else knows what else, depending on, I guess, the size and the rotation of it. So that's, I guess, all I've got right now.
So you have like a little pump system that you tried pumping GANs through it and so on. Is that part of the deal here?
Yeah, just a small brushless pump. They're quiet, and yeah, it's nice to have it battery operated too. A little bit more of a different effect with it, but it's interesting. It's like once you actually create the field strength, that line of communication is sort of open, and possibly, you know, that you birth that soul aspect, that free plasma, and you don't really need to turn it on again. It's sort of there. Maybe once in a while you would turn it on again to maybe change the strength or position of it, but I've been leaving this one reactor off for the last week in one position, and its field strengths haven't seemed to defer or change in noticeable way from what I've been experiencing from it.
You could see maybe having a solar, you have one of these in the garden with a solar panel running the battery or capacitor for the motor, and it could turn on every hour or 2 or 3 or whatever after charging up a bit, and run the motor for a bit, and then let it just sit there. Maybe run it once a day to kind of refresh the GANs, you could say.
Yeah, I think that's That's a great idea. When I was doing sprout experiments, I was only turning the system on in a larger sort of coil design for about 15 minutes a day, and that's all it really needed. But it was inside the containment field. And regarding the universal space enhancement unit, he's saying it's resembling the womb of the mother, or it's replicating the womb of the mother. And in indigenous ceremonies in North America or Turtle Island, there's a ceremony that literally is that. It's the womb of the mother, and it's inside a sweat lodge, what they call it. There's different lodges. There's star lodges. There's different lodges for different ceremonies and purposes and rituals, but they all reside in a completely black lodge, and they would use, I guess, animal skins a while back, which is a nanomaterial. So I've heard of some pretty amazing things happening in these lodges, and I've experienced maybe 20 different sweat ceremonies in a lodge, and it's incorporating fire, water, earth, air, all the elements inside, and it's an interesting experience for anyone that hasn't. There's usually some sort of indigenous community hosting these ceremonies in your vicinity if you're from North America, and even around the world. This is a universal sort of understanding of creating this sort of environment, replicating it. Oh, and Rick, we're seeing your desktop.
Oh, I see. Sorry about that.
No worries.
It's hard to share proper sometimes.
It's getting late too.
Yes, it is getting late, and we're into like up to 3.5 hours here. We're trying to keep the workshops down to less than 3 hours, or 2.5 ideally, with the 1N, 1P, 1R, and probably the Knowledge Seekers workshop as well now going on in. Okay, well, thank you, Thomas, for your ideas there. Nice looking unit. Has, oh, sorry, my sound wasn't on live stream. Nice looking unit, and seems like it's got the right stuff to work.
I wanted to add just a little more thing regarding the egg shape and the vortex or torus that you've been showing. Whenever you have an egg shape, you basically create a little imbalance in between the magnetic and the gravitational. So if you take a look at what the egg shape does, it creates a vortex inside. It's not a quick vortex, but these are the ideas that Mr. Schauberger showed us. So whenever you create, for example, a well where you create an egg-shaped cistern or container of water underground, it will automatically clean itself, because by the gradient difference, the temperature gradient difference between the top and the bottom of the water, there will be a vortex of a slow vortex of slow flow through the egg shape. So I think this egg shape is also displayed in our heads, because this is why we have slightly conical heads. And yeah, I think this shape is universal. We should apply it and use it in terms of reactor design.
Well, it's a good point, and although it's true about the circulation, like you mentioned, with the temperature differences, it also has to do with the actual angle of the walls and the way the material interacts with that special shape, which is um, pointier at one end. The eggs have a pointy end and a flatter end. So that's interesting as well in terms of those flows.
I was gonna actually get into Victor Schauberger's work because that's absolutely correct, Lawrence. If you actually do a cross section of a vortex, it is the shape of the egg, and maybe we can get into his work maybe next time because it is pretty extensive and it can be, I guess, translated into plasmatic physics quite easily with our understandings. And he actually did make a flying device using this sort of toroidal. I didn't actually understand the mechanical workings of it, but I'm sure you've seen it, Rick. Victor Schauberger's, he called it a tornado. It was in German, but it translated as some sort of tornado creation generator, whatnot. Basically creating, I think, scintillation with water and gases. But yeah.
The repulsing, I believe it was called.
Yeah, repulsin. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think he used the same principles as we did with the nano-coated copper and the zinc. He created different shapes that basically ionized the water and created a separation on the bottom and on the top. And he had this vortex. And the reason why I brought up this Gabriel horn thing is because the Gabriel's horn is also a vortex. So I think whenever we consider something matter, we basically have an egg. And this is what we call proton and electron are basically the two sides of the egg. So it's not these bubbles as we are currently using, but it's this vorticular movement that's also visible in the torus shape or in this Marco-Rodin's coil with the space gap in between the different coils acting as a capacitor that maintains the structure. So whenever you have a neutron in the center, there is this vorticular flow where the vortex itself creates a magnetic and a gravitational flow. So whenever you have a visible flow into the center, you also have an invisible flow out from the center from the same direction of looking at the torus. And the flow also creates the vorticular flow also separates these different items. So whenever we mix something in form of ganses, we have a mix that we can't properly tell what kind of fields there are. But as soon as there's a vorticular movement, the different densities and weights of elements, just like in a centrifuge, separates themselves and create different strands in the one vortex, like you've seen exactly in this beautiful torus Marco-Rodin coil. So there are those strands created by the vorticular movement and that's toroidal. So I think we should apply these principles when creating our reactors. So egg shape is very nice, and nano coating is very nice, and creating a gradient of plasmas is nice. And I think the torus will ignite itself if we give it just a little bit of energy. And I think that's what the potassium forte is for, or the conversion from potassium to argon. Because if you take a look at the patent, the original patent, there these different gases were aligned with each other layer by layer. So there's got to be some kind of field that creates this kind of separation, because if you just put different gases into a container, they will mix. I don't know how and why they would not mix just like our gases mix when we mix them together. So you need to have some kind of energy that creates the separation layer by layer. And I
Well, the
think it's this.
separation is done in the reactor by rotation, which creates that gravitational effect, or what we call centrifugal force, that creates like an artificial gravity, which separates out the heavier materials toward the outer wall of the rotating
Yeah,
reactor, lighter toward the center.
You don't see electric motors and rotors and other things in the universe. So the movement, the rotation needs to come from inside.
But we do see rotation, and we do see the heavier things going toward the outside and the lighter things going toward the inside when that rotation happens. So, but yeah, you're right. So it needs a source, and it seems like that ignition key, or a good example of it, would be that potassium 40 that you mentioned.
Could I make a comment about the womb?
The womb? Which womb?
The egg.
Womb number 1, womb number 2, or womb number 3?
Okay.
Ah, the mother womb.
Yes. Now, if I just make this comment, because it's been on my mind, and I did bring it up recently, that we know the Buddha partially understood Mr. Keshe's teachings, and Jesus fully understood Mr. Keshe's teachings. And when Jesus was having a conversation in the Bible, and he was telling the guy, you got to be reborn, and the guy was saying, you know, look, this is cuckoo, you cannot possibly go back into your other mother's womb, and so on and so forth. Now we have, and these are the only two places where I could think of people talking about going back into the womb of the mother. That point, and now Mr. Keshe has said he's created a system where you can go back into the womb of the mother. I've never heard anybody, and
well, that's been the basis of primal therapy as well, what they call primal therapy, and some of the other movements that are based on that, where you go back,
meditate,
and to go back into the point of birth, basically, and you can actually experience that, and
but we're talking
back to that time.
But we're talking about two individuals that understand the plasma technology talking about going back into the womb of the mother. I think it's different than what their understanding is. In the primordial sense, what you were saying about a therapy.
Well, it's about discovering who you are and realizing what that is. And it's, I don't care if you're Christ, Buddha, or Joe Blow on the street bum. It's all the same soul that we go back to find out about. And once you get there, and then you find out that's where you were, that's who you were when you were born. You weren't all this physicality stuff that's been dumped on since, and all the conditioning and all the experiences and other things that get pushed upon us as we get older and older. And you work through all that and get back to that primal part of what's left, that essence being that's left, when everything else gets taken away or removed or temporarily suspended or otherwise get by the buffers. You got to get by the buffers, and once you get back to that essence, like you were born state, it is like being reborn, or what born again is called, being born again. But most of them don't mean it in a deep sense like that. They mean it in a different way. But that is the essence of those kind of teachings. It doesn't always go according to plan. You could go part way back to your birth and end up picking up a bunch of stuff that is difficult to deal with, let's say.
I know, but this is a system that's been created to do that. It's just,
Well, it hasn't actually been created yet, actually, other than the systems that are in place. I mean, we don't have this actual unit yet. It may be in production or whatever, but and we know that it will require different settings for different individuals and different diseases and different treatments and so on. It's not just the
Sure.
same for everybody. Jump in, away you go.
I
It'll
understand.
require an operator that's very knowledgeable and intuitive in order to operate and assist in the process.
And a medical doctor.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Basically, the operator who there should be a, well, maybe the operator wouldn't be a medical doctor necessarily, but the assistant, but somewhere a doctor nearby to make sure everything's going according to plan. But it does seem like the kind of system where it's hard to cause major errors and disruptions. It's made like the womb of the mother or other protective environments. It's in a way, by definition, it's protective because that's where the intention is set, and that's where the effectiveness lies, is in returning to that essence or soul-based state. And all the healing can occur from that very easily.
Yeah, I was thinking, I wonder what it returns you to. You know, there is a period of time, I think, so many days, weeks, or so on, where the embryo is not connected to anything, but it's not connected to the matter state, but and it's existing and surviving and growing on its own. But then when it gets hooked up to the umbilical cord somehow, at that point is when you get connected to the matter state, as I understand it.
Okay, well, that's a good point.
So I wonder where this machine takes us, to the pre-connection to the umbilical cord, to the matter state, which would seem really free.
Well, what about we have birth, of course, and that's what we were kind of talking about before, taking this primal idea of going back and back to your point of birth, being that's where your problem started and so on. But what about it? Maybe it was just the connection with the mother. What if the mother is, got all kinds of problems happening, and that's being transferred through that umbilical cord when that started? So in that case, it would be maybe I don't know what it would be, a month or two or less of existence inside this body where you're not so directly connected through the bloodstream and whatnot. And like you say, you're in there growing and floating in this environment without much input or output. So do we go back to that point, or do we go back to before that point, where the point of actual conception? Or do we go back even further to the point of preconception? And that's an idea that's might come into play, because if you look at it, you could look at it just in the concept of consciousness in the moment. We have the creation of a thought, in effect, the birth of a thought, and we have that thought is brought out by verbalizing it and extrapolating it. It's born, it grows, and it becomes this thing that maybe we create a new art object out of this thought, or whatever, something happens from this thought. And that's all the process of the birth and creation and life of that thought. But what about the space or the existence of ourselves pre-thought, before conception of the thought, or preconception? And what is our state of existence in that framework? What would it be like to be there rather than already engaged in the thought and the whole process that more or less automatically comes from that interaction, or that that process that kicks in once that initial thought happens, that inkling of a thought. So there we are in the void, and everything's fine, and then all of a sudden a thought happens, and we get all involved with this thought, and pretty soon it all gets so involved it becomes a lifetime, or a big part of a lifetime. So in a way, going back, we can go back so far that, from the soul's point of view, it was there before the thought occurred, or before the being was conscious or interacting in a way. But it may have a totally different existence than what we conceive of what we call existence. Big questions. Requires a lot of pondering. Any other ponders or ideas, concepts, questions? What needs to be said that hasn't been said tonight, or shall we wrap it up? Here it is, getting on. I think people are being nice to me here, allowing me to wrap things up. Perhaps, sure, we could go on for hours, because some of these concepts are fun to play with and to develop out. I think we'll continue working with the ideas as Lawrence has elucidated so well today, and we return back to of the basic reactor designs and the basics of the reactor that we are. And maybe we could end with a comment from that Jedi's put in the chat here. It's from the, I believe it's the Buddhist way, or from India, with the Brahma, the first male, formed by the indiscernible eternal first cause in a golden egg, resplendent as the sun. Having continued a year in the egg, Brahma divided it into two parts by his mere thought, and with these two shells he formed the heavens and the earth, and in the middle he placed the sky, the 8 regions, and the eternal abode of the waters. Well, that's nice. Thank you, Jedi. And I think on that note, I'll end it for today. So I thank everyone for your participation here. Today's Keshe Plasma Reactor Group for Wednesday, October 9th, 2019. And of course, do attend the Knowledge Seekers Workshop coming up Thursday, 9 a.m. Central European Time, as I'm sure Mr. Keshe will have some announcements, and there'll be some interesting questions to be asked and answered within that workshop as well. So we make progress as we go along, slowly but surely. And it's been some great topics here tonight, or today, wherever you are. And I'm looking forward to carry on with those concepts and develop them out. Perhaps we can even get some practical examples shown as to some working models. That would be fun as well. Okay, thanks everyone. And we'll see you next time around.
Thanks, Rick, for your beauty and grace.
Thank you, Mark, for your remarkable repartee.